my name is Emily Beynon and today I'm going to talk about Mendelssohn SCHERZO. We're in a magical woodland of fairies and magic potions, so let's see how we can make your 40-second orchestral excerpt sparkle with energy. Firstly, let's talk about phrasing. And I think it's nice to avoid having a little accent on each bar. Let's look at how the phrases are actually structured. Now we've got 3 long phrases. Let's look at how the first of these big phrases could be broken down into micro phrases. I think we've got a 2-bar phrase, another 2-bar phrase, then a 1-bar, 1-bar, 2-bar, 2-bar. And if we translate that into dynamics, that's not really what it is, but let's consider a diminuendo for a bar, then a crescendo. Another diminuendo for a bar and a crescendo. Now the 2 1-bar phrases, think of each of those 1 bars as having a little release inside them. Diminuendo, diminuendo. Then the F sharp is the most important note. Release as you go up to the top C, and then a crescendo down into the low G 2 bars later. And then, of course, a little diminuendo to the top G. And we can work in a similar way in the next 2 big phrases. Think of how often the harmonies change. Now, there are some other little clues that Mendelssohn leaves us. 6 bars before Q, he writes in a crescendo diminuendo. So make sure that the low F sharp isn't too loud. That's the start of the crescendo. That means that that's the softest note. And then we have these 3 phrases going to E flat. The first time quite a quick diminuendo, the second time quite a quick diminuendo, and then the third time really spread that diminuendo over the whole 5 bars. And then we get to the lowest point in the solo. The rest of the orchestra stops playing and you're left completely alone. So I think it's really nice to not only resist the temptation to crescendo as you go up to the final D, but actually to even diminuendo. One of the biggest pitfalls in this solo is to play it too fast. The tempo that I think I would aim for is something like 80 or 84, but especially when your heart's going like the clappers, you're likely to play it a little too fast and too slow. Now, even if an orchestra doesn't ask you to play the first 5 bars, do make sure that you think of those first 5 bars in your head. Also thinking very much of the direction towards the G and then diminuendo as you go up to the top G. The first 2 bars, nice and crispy, very short articulation. And then maybe with a G minor arpeggio, maybe there you can play slightly longer. Now, one of the reasons why we might be tempted to play this too fast is because we think that we might run out of breath. But the point is, if we play it a bit faster, actually we've got less time to breathe. The most important thing is to take a really good breath before you start playing. It's the sort of place where I would breathe in slowly through my nose before starting. It will feel much more slowly, but from much lower down. Then in the solo itself, when we have the chance to breathe, make sure that you really open your body, relax to the maximum to let the most air in, and make sure that the note before the breath and especially the note after the breath are quite soft. Now, sometimes, even in an audition, you might have to take an emergency breath. There are 2 options for this. One is the second note of the 3rd bar of Q, taking out this G if you need to in an emergency situation. And the other is in the bar with the low C sharp. In an emergency, you might be able to take out the first D of that bar to breathe. And what's really important with emergencies is that you make sure that you practice those escape routes, just in case you need them. Another thing which is very tempo related is the articulation, of course. I bet you were wondering when I was going to get onto that. For me, this solo is rather too slow for double tonguing and it's rather too long for single tonguing. By the way, don't forget to practice this legato so that your poor tongue doesn't get the blame for possibly uneven fingers. And I like to use articulation to underline and emphasize the phrasing too. So at the loudest points, I use a slightly broader staccato, and at the softest points, absolutely very crisp, dry and short staccato. That will really bring it to life. And how about dynamics in this solo? Well, the first 5 bars that we play, those are in piano. For the solo itself, I would think piano, maybe mezzo piano, but make sure that you leave something in reserve for the last 5 bars, which are pianissimo. So here are a few exercises which I think might be quite helpful. The first thing we need to feel really secure about is this first upbeat D, G, almost like a resonant double bass pizzicato. And think about releasing the sound rather than attacking the sound. For that reason, I would use the tongue out articulation, if you feel comfortable doing that, and maybe even consider using the 4th finger in the left hand to help that low D speak. Now, the next exercise, which I think is really important, I've already mentioned it, and that's to practice the whole thing legato. This will get you using your best sound in the low register. It will make sure your fingers are really even, and you'll get used to keeping the air flowing. To avoid an uneven double staccato, I would practice just the g sound on its own. Ga 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 ga, ga 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 ga. See if you can play the whole solo like that. And then if that feels doable, even if it's a slightly slower tempo, then try ga da ga da ga da ga da ga da ga da ga. So we're switching the double tonguing the other way around. When you feel comfortable doing that, try 1 bar of single staccato and 1 bar of double tonguing. Single, double, single, double. And then, of course, the other way around. Double, single, double, single. That will really help you to control the tempo so you don't get tempted to rush away. And it will also really help you to notice the difference in quality, if there is one, between the single staccato and the double staccato. Actually, in the orchestra, it's really useful to have a very wide crossover from where your single staccato can go quite fast and where your double staccato can go quite slow, because sometimes we can get surprised by the tempo in the concert. There are a few danger points which we haven't yet covered in this solo. The first one is this middle E flat. It's not the favourite note of a single flute player that I've ever met. Make sure you make friends with that E flat and that you know exactly how to get it to speak crisply for this solo. The next one is as we come from the low C sharp to the D near the very end, if you have to breathe after this D, make sure that the next note doesn't get a big accent. And be careful that you don't give the D at the end of the next bar a big finger accent. Both those things should be avoided. And finally, just at the very end, make sure that the last 3 Gs are perfectly in tune and just keep it absolutely strictly in tempo. Now, what are the differences with playing this excerpt in the orchestral context? Well, firstly, you might have to play it something more like mezzo forte or even forte to carry across the orchestra. Secondly, there are a couple of tricky spots earlier in the scherzo which will almost never be asked for an orchestral audition, but it's worth looking out for if this comes up on your orchestral schedule. The first is this tricky little thing with trills. And then this moment, which feels very uncomfortable. But if you're playing the entire incidental music to the Midsummer Night's Dream, then actually one of the most scary moments, I think, is in the overture, where there are these very exposed open woodwind chords, which are very dangerous for intonation. So those are some of my thoughts on preparing the Mendelssohn Scherzo for an audition. And I'm going to leave you with an excerpt from a concert with the Royal Concertgebouw Orchestra in my second season, so quite a while ago now, conducted by Sir John Eliot Gardiner. I hope you enjoy it. See you next time. Thank you.